Alright, so what we're going to be making today has been deemed the Chopstick Dropbox. So this is made in all one piece. You can use this size would be more like a jewelry box or whatever, but traditionally I was told, as the story goes, that these are for like steamed rice, anything that you want to keep nice and warm but also moist. So you would close the lid on whatever you have in there, even if it is just used for storage. Good maybe for like salt. I like to keep an open container for salt, but also keep the bugs out. But this whole thing is made in one piece. So essentially, this is thrown up and coned in, and I'll show you that in just a second via the demonstration. But this little notch is made, again, the Chopstick Dropbox, with the chopsticks that usually come apart, that just break apart like that at the top. There's usually a large notch at the beginning. So you would just take the chopstick on your one all together thrown piece, you'd make a little notch here. The next day, you trim this down with the needle tool, and essentially, if it fits right and you made a big enough notch, it'll fit all in one piece, okay? And you'll have a nice lid made for it. So this will be the very first piece in our lid series. Series of 4. The next one will be recessed, then inset, and then a dome lid. So right now I'm starting with exactly 4 pounds. This may be overshooting it, but again, I do want to make something a little bigger. I do want to make a rice container this time, now that I know what it's for. So I'm going to push this in the middle, get it slightly centered before I even start. Okay, and I'll start my throwing. Okay, throwing pretty much just like anything else until we get to the lid. So it'll be a pretty tall cylinder. It's going to be much taller initially than the actual container itself will be later on. So just reminders, elbow in, use your body weight, try not to just use arm strength, coning up, coning down. So I'll do that verbally and actively. So coning up, pushing the side, okay. Remember, it's the heel of the hand. It's not so much anything over here. The fingers are relaxed, so it looks like I'm wrapping around there, but it's really the heel of the hand. Coning up. If you really want to cone up, use both hands. This was a mixed bag between 2 different bags, so they may be varying drynesses, so it's good to cone up really high. And then coning back down. I'm just using the ball of my thumb. Coming back down very slowly. And again, once I hit that bottom, I want to make sure that this part of the L shape on my hand is stopping the clay from moving. If it's jerking my arm around, that means I don't have my elbow in my hip. Okay, so now we're pretty close to centered. Just double check. I always double and triple check. Also, when you push down, sometimes you may get some air pockets. I didn't get any this time, but it does happen, especially when I'm mixing bags of clay. So again, double check. And there, I just threw it off center. Quiet myself for a second and focus on centering. It's definitely the most crucial part is centering. And if it's not centered now, once I open it, I end up having to cut off excess clay and wasting clay. Also, I'll have to recenter. I always recenter anyway before I pull up, but it's a good habit to be in, but to have. Okay, so now I'm centered, ready to open. Again, elbows in to my body. I push down the center. Open just slightly. Okay, see that little wobble, I'll recenter that in just a second. Get my needle tool, measure my bottom. I want a nice deep foot on this, so I'm gonna measure probably about a little less than a ½ inch. 3/4 is way too much. So about right there. Okay. So I'm actually going to go down just a slight amount more. do just a little splash of water to be able to reduce friction, but at the same time I don't want to blind myself with too much water and the murkiness in the middle. Elbows into my body. I'm going to pull out towards my belly button. So again, this one I do want to be a little bit wider than the last one. So I'm going out about as wide as I would for a normal, say, cereal bowl or ice cream bowl. Then I'm going to compress my bottom. Okay, anything wider than a cup has a tendency to crack. Even cups can crack too, especially with porcelain. So I compress that bottom. I usually do it twice. Twice both in and out, so technically 4 times across the floor. Make sure that floor is nice and flat and even. Throw a little pizzazz in there. Okay, and again, make sure it's re-centered. Before I start pulling up, I want to make sure it's nice and centered. Clean my hand off. So now I'm ready for a pull. So just a traditional pull. I'm going to slow my wheel down a little bit so you can see the action of it. I'm going to get rid of this little sharp edge, just dull it with my sponge, just because I don't want it to wrinkle off. It's a piece of clay. I'm sure I'll lose clay on the way up somewhere, but I want to reduce the amount of clay that I'm getting rid of so that this piece can be as big as I had hoped or planned on initially. Especially if I'm making sets, I want to make sure that I'm not losing any clay on the way up. If I've weighed out 4 pieces, 20 pieces, doesn't matter, it's all to 2 pounds, or in this case 4 pounds. I don't want to take off any clay and it may not match the size of the rest. So my pole is going to be between these 2 fingers. My middle primarily. This one's going to help reduce the line that's going to be made here. So when I squeeze, it's going to reduce that. It's going to dull that line. I'm going to squeeze up. And on the same pole, I'm going to have my ring finger and my thumb back here. So I'm doing 2 poles at once. It's called a crab claw. So a little bit of water on the inside. Get rid of some of that water. Now I'm going to pull. I like to do definitely a volcano shape on anything vertical. Any vertical forms, I like to do a volcano because you can always pull the clay outward, especially if you have a thick enough lip, but it's hard to come back. You go out into no man or no woman's land, and it's hard to come back from out here to back inside. So now I'm going to compress my lip, as with almost every pull, unless I just forget. It's just kind of realigning everything, recentering everything. Also makes the lip a lot stronger, at least as the theory goes. So on this pull, I'm really going to focus from the bottom to there. After I get there, it's already fairly thin. It's definitely not thin enough. It's probably about 1/2 inch thick, which is heavy as all get out. But this pull, I'm going to focus down here. I'm really going to squeeze that clay in. And then once I get to that line, I'm going to soften my touch and carry it up the rest of the way nice and even. So the way I keep it even is my pressure is the same, and I just keep my fingers a certain distance apart, so about as thick as I want the wall. And it'll take me usually 2 or 3 pulls. So I'm going to pull, and I carry that bulge up. That bulge right here is my inside hand. So just above the sponge on the inside. I felt a little drag on the inside. That's why I squirt just a little bit of water. And you'll notice I switched that pole just by accident. I didn't use my middle finger, I just used the pointer, so I got a little bit of excess clay there because I got a little sharp hand down here. Okay, clean my hand. My sponge. I'm ready for another pull. So I always overestimate in my videos because I don't want to run out of clay. So this may be a bit much, 4 pounds. I know the last one was 2 1/4, I believe it was, that little one that I showed you. So see, this time I'm using that middle finger and the pointer finger. It's Starting to drag a little bit, but I'm going to ride it out. Throw a little bit dry to some degree for stoneware. Okay. Get rid of some of this excess down here. So that's normally what I trim off with my modeling tool. I do want to still squeeze some of that in there, get as much size out of this as I can. So again, I always put my inside hand right against the wall on the inside, and I pour a little bit of water down. Okay, a little bit of water on the inside just so that my hand doesn't drag, because I'm not using a sponge on the inside. Then I'm going to squeeze that in again and carry that bulge out. And I'm lightening my touch at the top because the top has a tendency, the top, like say 3/4 of an inch, to be a little bit thinner. Okay, and one last pull, and this one's more of a straightening pull than it is. I might pull a little bit at the bottom, but the rest of it's already thin enough. So right there I'm stopping, and I'm just going to go up just to make sure it's nice and straight and even throughout the whole wall. Drag just a little bit at the top. So I go back and just kind of straighten that out. I don't need to do anything with the lip because I may end up cutting off quite a bit of that. I want to make sure that I get all the water out of the inside. Otherwise, once I enclose this and let it dry to leather hard, it's going to have a bunch of water stuck inside. And if that water is inside, it'll erode just like it does to the earth. It'll find a way out over the night or the next day, day and a half, before I trim it. Okay, so I'm just soaking water out of the inside. This sponge is a great sponge for throwing, but it's not very absorbent. So it takes a few attempts to get it all out of there. And you'll see I knocked the top off a little bit. I'll straighten that out in just a second. I usually use the normal like yellow throwing sponge to get the water out of the inside. So I'm just going to come up the wall now, get some of that slip off. Okay, straighten that wall real quick. So this will be one of numerous rib attempts, if you will. So I just take mostly the slip off the outside, but I'm also pushing a little bit against the hand on the inside. I'm going to need some moisture at the top. I'll probably go in somewhere from here. But I'm going to cone inward, or collar inward, is a better term for it. Just double check and make sure I got all the water out. There's a little bit in there. Okay. So a little bit of moisture on the outside, and I start kind of high, right there, and I'll just squeeze inward. And then when I run out of clay at the top, I'll go down a little bit more, get my hands wet. Okay, it's always 3 points of pressure. So if you kind of see what the inside, I don't know if you can see that with the video, but it's 1, 2, and then somewhere in the back. Okay. Getting a little dry, I'll add a little bit more moisture, but I think this pull is close to closing if it doesn't close. Okay, a little bit of moisture, almost. So you want to go little by little because you don't want to go too low on the sides and have all lid and not enough container. Okay, so we are closed now. So now I'm going to take my sponge. The side looks pretty good. I didn't touch too much of the side. I'm on the top now. Just kind of cleaning things up. Make sure that top's nice and sealed. Sometimes I'll over seal and I'll have like a little spout here and I'll just cut that off with a needle tool. I'd rather do that than have a small hole in the top There will be like a little belly button on the inside. So now I'm going to do some shaping. You can use a metal rib, rubber rib. The wooden ones are really good for the sides. I'm going to go ahead and do traditional trimming on the side of this one. So I'm going to take this modeling tool and just put the blade against the side and just go down so that it's semi-flat. It's never perfect. Okay. You could just scrape it this way. Sometimes it's a little easier or a little more methodical to take your needle tool underneath it. Stick into the modeling tool so you can take your needle tool underneath so it pops through the other side. Then you cut that off. Okay, save that for the recycle. Good piece. So you can see it's really misshapen right now. So I'm going to take this wooden rib, really flatten out this side. Okay. I could use this for the top as well. Just to show you, I can use my metal rib as well. Just take this. I like to make it come to kind of a point. That can be done in layers too. I'll show you what I mean. So I could go here, a little bit here. You can trim some round lines, square lines, all kinds of different things. A lot of this comes together once you're trimming. So I am actually going to cut a little bit out of the top. So I don't like how domed the top is. I think it's a bit much. So I'm going to cut out a small circle. Notice I cut it at a slant because I don't want it to fall inside. I gotta get that little chunk off of there. There we go. I don't want it to fall inside my pot, so I cut it a slant. Now I got enough space to where I can really get in there. I'll clean up those little chunks. This also helps me because I can pull this up. I thicken that. Anytime you collar inward, it's going to thicken that clay. So I'm going to pull this, thin it, back towards the top. This is where I was talking about that little spout that I might get. Cut a little bit. Okay. So now it's a little thinner too, so it's not such a heavy lid and I don't have to trim too much off of the lid. You'll trim pretty much everything on this. Okay, so now I'm going to comb that back in. Not too much water. Okay, and see that little dimple at the top? I can chop that off if I need to. Now I'm back to cleaning up and squaring up my top. That was a bit much clay. Just too much of a dome there. Okay. I could use the metal one, but this one's a little bit longer because I cut my metal rib. So I can go nice and flat here. This will give me a little area to add some texture. There, so this side is a little far out, sticking out a bit much. And this will also make it taller. You can see how it just edged up, so that'll make my container a little bit bigger. So it was down here, now I just scooted my container up here. I'm not going to make this perfectly square because I'm going to trim some of that off the side later tomorrow. I like this shape. Kind of took me where it wanted to go. like a little hut. Might even run with that with creativity. Okay. Now it's just sponge cleanup time, and then it's chopstick lid time. And I won't cut it today. I'll just make a nice clean line. Just cleaning things up. But I'll make my line, let it dry to leather hard, and then I'll use my needle tool, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Okay. So I want a little bit of the top here to remain, and like I said, I would normally use a chopstick, but we don't have chopsticks readily available here at the school. So I use plastic forks because they're available in the cafeteria. So I take the plastic fork and I make a line, and I tilt just a little bit to make sure that my lid is, once I cut it, it just falls straight in and I don't have to trim anything. So I make a line right there. So that's my initial line. I remove all that clay because it'll bunch up on there. Then I'm going to take that square that's cut in there and I'm going to tilt just a little bit. I've seen my students use the back of a needle tool on this as well. For me, I don't think it's enough of a line to fit inside, just personal preference. But I'm going to take this inside, like so. Okay, clean that off. I'm going to take my sponge. I want to make sure that little excess clay here doesn't go up. I don't want it to get in the way, so I'm going to push down and into the side to clean that up. Then likewise, or opposite, up here at the top, I don't want to push that down into the slot I made. I want to make sure that it's going upwards into my lid. You could do a wet chatter on this for a texture if you wanted to. I'll show you on the old one, the one that was made prior to. It's got a little chunk in there, so I'm just going to use my smooth rib. Flatten that out. Just kind of finalizing everything, getting detailed with it. Okay, also, you don't want too much water up here now at this point, because that's quite the slant, and it will have a tendency to collapse on you. So I'm just going to lightly sponge over all this. Redefine my line just in case. I always like to double check because tomorrow I don't want to have to trim away, and I will show how to trim away just in case, but I want to make sure that my line is tilted this way so that when I cut, I'm going to take my needle tool right down here. I'm going to cut straight in there, not straight, but at a diagonal, and my lid should just plop right on in there. Okay? Should plop right on in. So that is the Chopstick Dropbox. Like I said, I'm going to refine that line really quickly and just make sure that it's slanted. And that is it. That is the Chopstick Dropbox.